in this nice little post. And then we had that little error because we didn't actually render a template. All right, so now let's go ahead and play around and try to get rid of this awesome red error that we've always been seeing. These unapplied migrations that say your app may not work properly until they're applied. So far it's been working fine. But one of the things that is not going to work well with is session. And so let's just make those commands. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, it's going to Python manage py make migrations. And then that'll generally, if you haven't made your own models, it'll just give you some little comment that says no changes detected, we're good. And then you can migrate. So Python manage py migrate is basically a key command for Django that says if you have database things, let's go ahead and generate the database that you are asking for. The make migrations kind of keeps track of what things you've asked for in the past, and it's kind of like Git for building models. But we'll talk about that in a bit. All right, so excellent. So we've pre-installed a bunch of things that we aren't actually using yet: authorization, admin, content types, but we're just about to use sessions. All right, so basically when you might make that migration and say migrate, it basically says and runs all these cool things. All right, and so we generate sessions, and this is kind of the key place. All right, so now let's go ahead and play around with that session. All right, so last time I kind of left you off with these 50 stars in this request.post. Let's go ahead and set a session variable, request.sessionName equals request.post first name. So this is a lot like Flask again. In Flask, to set a session variable, we just wrote session and then whatever the key variable is. In Django, we have to say request.session. Big change, I know. It's going to be tough to write that extra, 8 characters. But you'll get used to it. You'll get over it. All right, cool. So now let's just say, hey, we're going to set name equal to what came back from our post, and then we're going to redirect home. All right, let's go over to our index.html. When we redirect home, let's go ahead and add our session variable. All right, this is one thing that's a little bit annoying with Django and Flask, having them back-to-back like this, is that the rendering, so Django doesn't use Jinja. It just uses something that looks a lot like Jinja and has slightly different behaviors. One of those behaviors is that you can't use square brackets. All right, so that's kind of frustrating. So, but we can still do something like request. And remember, we're passing this request object back. So this is where this render request object, and I said we were going to always pass it back over. So basically, this request object is what's going to allow us to use session right now. So we said request session name. So request.session, and then we're going to access that key more JavaScript in a more JavaScript-like style and actually do .name rather than bracket name. All right, so let's go ahead and see what happens when we run this. So make sure our server is up and running. Cool. There's our server. All right. I might have played around with this before I brought this video up. So, oh, yep, I did. All right, cool. So let's pull in Kelvin. And there's Kelvin being shown up in our session. Now, this is just like all other sessions. Basically, you can turn things off, turn things on. As long as you don't close the browser, that session's still going to be around. So cruise over here. Here's my awesome video that I just made just a second ago. And if we go back to localhost 8000, Kelvin is still stuck in our session. All right, cool. So there's session. There's one more way of passing variables that we'll talk about in the next video, and that is basically through that context dictionary that I kind of mentioned earlier. That context dictionary is going to be pretty useful. Obviously, if you're making variables and want to pass them over as a one-time event, or if you just got something from your database back and you want to print all that stuff out, you don't want to store all that in session. That's really inefficient. The only thing you really want to store in session are just kind of these key things, maybe a first name and maybe an ID for the database. But beyond that, try to avoid using session as much as you can. Sometimes for quick little projects like the ones that we're about to do, because you don't want to allow people to resubmit a form over and over again, like let's say they were buying something from Amazon, if you have them resubmit the form over and over again, it would buy that thing multiple times, and that'd be super annoying. Especially if you're actually putting in credit card information. So you want to have that a redirect to kind of clear out that session post prior to allowing you to redirect or reset it. And one of the ways to do that is set those session variables or flash variables. So sometimes you have to set a few extra session variables, but make sure you try to clear them out as you can. And it's interesting. So obviously, one might suspect that Django has a flash variable, just like Flask does, and it does. So we'll also play with Flash in a little bit. All right, cool.